Since I was a kid, I've loved the progression of racing games. I've loved the fantasy of taking an old beater and using it to climb to glory and assemble a garage of rare and beautiful machines. Of course, it almost never works out that way for anyone in real life. For the average person, owning a Maserati is as realistic a goal as actually uniting Middle-earth, and so we turn to games to give us an approximation of these fantasies. The only race most people actually run is the one against time, wear, and inevitable breakdown. And you never do place first in that one. Escapism and power fantasy are the dominant themes of game design because the medium is so uniquely suited to exploring them. But the flip side of this is that games spend so much effort trying to portray the impossible, the exotic, and the empowering that it's rarely that a player can find a meaningful reflection of the more mundane and regular concerns of their lives. Jalopy is a game that reflects the emotional and mechanical complexity of everyday things. It draws on the things we learn as adults about scarcity, family, and reliance on unreliable objects. It's a whole different side of the conversation about maturity in games than who's decapitating who and how much spandex. Jalopy was as vivid as it was to me because I've been an amateur mechanic all my adult life, but I've only been a competent amateur mechanic for the past couple of years. There's a patience you need that I didn't have for a long time, a willingness to go through each repair step in a very deliberate, very strict way to allow the machine to tell you what it needs as opposed to trying to bend it to your will. You can't ever say, well, this is how it should be, it is what it is, and then you have to adapt, or else wind up with a 4,000-pound paperweight. Jalopy is a game that embraces the triumphs and trials of owning a difficult, ancient junker car better than any I've ever seen, and I've hardly ever felt so strongly connected to a driving game because of it. By reflecting my reality, not my fantasy, Jalopy became a more personally compelling title than any Need for Speed ever has been to me. I've spent months of my life making pizza to save up for a carburetor. I've sold boxes of my favorite books to put gas in my tank. Living paycheck to paycheck takes the same kind of patience as good, solid mechanical work does. You have to accommodate disaster and be bold in the face of having no recourse for failure. It's hard for games to market experiences that are not empowering, so most high-budget games would not embrace scarcity and disappointment the way that Jalopy does. I wouldn't have appreciated it as a teenager either. I would have wanted my fantasy car to go fast, not struggle for 35 on a moderate incline. As an indie game, though, Jalopy is free to be what it is, a game reliant on actual adult themes and experience. Last year, I had a hell of a time keeping a 1988 Mercury Grand Marquis I bought for $500 on the road. I couldn't put more than another $100 or so into it for parts, so I had to prioritize. What is absolutely necessary to get down the road, and what can be ignored until the day more money finally, hopefully, maybe does come in. I got 6 months out of it before the transmission failed, and I washed my hands of it. That was the end of that particular real-life playthrough of Jalopy for me. In the game, you've got a 2-cylinder Soviet junker called the Laika, and it is resplendent in its inadequacy. You pry a door off a donor Laika, assemble the engine block, carb, air filter, gas tank, battery, and ignition coil, and then put each tire on before bolting them down one by one in sequence. You don't just wait for the green light and go. You tinker, and you're eventually rewarded. Basic functionality is the elusive goal. And the satisfaction of achieving it is as sweet as any Borderlands loot drop. It's hard to get ahead in Jalopy monetarily, but if you do, you can upgrade the Laika with new parts to help it run faster, with less wear and tear. You can customize it with accessories. You can pull it out of the scrap heap and make it yours. It was well into my 20s that I had the mechanical confidence to do something like that in real life, but Jalopy gamifies the experience in a way that evokes a genuine parallel. In one playthrough, I saw an old derelict Laika on the side of the road. I stopped, popped the hood. Parts! Scuffed up, half-broken parts, but better than mine. I took them and swapped them for my own rusted, clattering components. I will never wield a flaming halberd of frost giant strength in real life, but there have been nights I've dreamt of popping a hood at a pick and pull and finding something equally mythic, and that's not quite so much of an unreasonable thing. With the latest update, they even added scrapyards to the game, allowing me to live out the fantasy inside the game in an even more explicit way than I had before. Of course, I didn't learn how to work on cars alone. I had help. I learned from friends. A lot of people learn from their families. In Jalopy, you learn from your uncle. He wakes you up, tells you he has something to show you, and then presents you with the Laika. No engine, no wheels, no tires, no door. Then he tells you, we have to drive to Turkey together, and tells you how to bring the little Soviet subcompact back to life. The game takes place directly after the end of the Cold War, putting you on a route all the way from East Germany to Turkey. As of this writing, the game is in early access, and you can only get as far as Hungary, and for the most recent update, your uncle doesn't actually make the journey with you. With the next update, he might when his code is fixed. But the setting is powerful. The world has changed from the last time your uncle came this way, coming from Turkey northward. Capitalism has come, and a fragmenting of power into newly sovereign nations. There are border checkpoints, where you tensely wait for the guards to check your papers, going in from Germany to the Czech Republic and more beyond. Here in the U.S., I felt similarly scrutinized going through Border Patrol checkpoints, waiting for the stern, frustrating, "Would you pull your car to the side and step out, please, sir?" And I've come to know my dad as a peer along the same way that the protagonist of Jalopy and his uncle get along. Growing up, my dad drove nothing but a succession of Toyota Camrys and held the same professorship from the late 70s through a couple years ago. He seemed like an eminently safe and predictable man, at least automotively and professionally. But as we talked as adults, swapping stories of adventure, he told me about a time in his life when he drove a Mustang and took a train journey to Moscow at the absolute height of the Cold War. My dad has a wilder past than I ever would have guessed at with any of my teenage assumptions. Most people's parents do, but you never do find out until you grow up and go a little wild yourself. The thing that's most interesting to me about the setting is how it feeds into the realism of the game's used parts market. As you go along, you might spy boxes on the side of the road. They contain luxury goods like cigarettes and vodka, which you can then use to buy tires, repair kits, gasoline, fancier parts. There are dozens and dozens of aftermarket parts, both from generic and fake brand name manufacturers. The flashiest and most expensive brand isn't even the best, and you have to decide what you'll buy based on financial necessity and taste. Just like in real life. The Leica is an East German car, though, through and through. It was not really meant to be customizable from the get-go. As a communist car, it serves the people and no more. But with capitalism comes customization and an aftermarket parts economy. The setting, that tumultuous period of uncertainty and scarcity right after the fall of the wall, makes the experience as foreign and intriguing as it is mechanically relatable. When I finally pulled in some in-game cash together to redo all my components, it felt almost as good as rebuilding a real antique junker. For the same reasons, it's an amazing pleasure and achievement to take an old and broken thing and make it vibrant again. And it's even more remarkable in-game because the rebuilding of the car and the freedom of the journey is itself quietly political, coming on the heels of the Soviet Union's collapse. And when it's not political, it's tactile in a way that's equally quiet and equally compelling. All your car accessories work. Your map light, your hazards, almost every knob and dial and handle can and must be operated manually with your butt parked in the driver's seat. It's incredibly satisfying from the first-person perspective. Games have come a long way in the past 10 years, and so have I. It's thrilling to grow up alongside games. I've seen games with emotional and technical sophistication I would not have dreamed of playing in the mid-90s, but games and escapism are as inseparable as they've always been. More and more, I'm glad for the diversity of the independent game development scene, for being willing to provide experiences like Jalopy that are clever and emotionally resonant, but very difficult to market. I just would not have understood what Jalopy was trying to do if I hadn't been out in the world, living with scarcity, nursing along ancient gas-guzzling rattletraps to ferry me to work and back for just one more paycheck. Jalopy's story and setup is one of quiet necessity. You need to drive a long, long way, and your car won't make it without miraculous ingenuity on the player's part. It's a whole order of magnitude quieter than saving the kingdom from the big evil menace. Really, there is no menace in Jalopy at all, except that you're very poor with a long way to go. Jalopy is a game where your engine starts smoking, you fix what you can, you close the hood, sigh, and say, "That'll have to do, for now." And you'll be hard-pressed to find a situation in gaming that's more genuinely adult than that. Thanks for watching. This channel and everything I do with it is supported through crowdfunding, where folks like you donate money to me to help keep my channel going. It's because of things like Patreon and crowdfunding that I've actually been able to get out of paycheck-to-paycheck living and start to make real progress with what I want to do with my life creatively. So, thanks to all of you, and thanks specifically to everyone who's currently donating over the $10 a month or more level. People like Cassie, Tom, Christian Zacharianson, Pat Hay, Soeb Sheik, Jake Brennan, Kevin DeBolt, Dennis Clark, Niles D. McDonald, Alexander Leister, Kumran Vision, Justin Hughes, Igor Babiak, Brian Hill, Jared Meyer, Andreas Larson, Kevin Schaub, White Zero, Irvin, Lars Ingvar Anderson, Aaron Albach, Martin Markov, Alexander Dmitriev, Joe Hewison, Aiden AK-47, Gordon Moon, Kimmo Heikkinen, Ariel Badger Release, Jody Warren, Tyser Vicarian, Jeffrey Knutson, Paul Cocker, Kyle Brown, Sasha Aya, Jack Harvey, Robert Glover, Alex Zolato, Matthew, Brad Carr, Preston Allen, Simo Polakowski, Stephen Petyok, Jake Mays, Alexander Heavens, Devin Fitzpatrick, Matthew Zender, Trivium Art History, Ivan Marinov, Jacob Robertson, Pierce McBride, Stephen Premel, Andrew Schiffel, Lee Jones, Michael Atwell, Bradley Smith, D. Stex, Rob Tackett, Angel-Headed Hipster, Daniel Moore-Myrie, Colin, Rob Clark, Joshua Vivi, Cameron, Dylan Sibley, Yuri Petnes, Wesley M., Sharif Kazemi, Harley McAvoy, I Cannot Fly, Brett Gialmo, Noah Duggins, Colby Howard, Divyath Faust, Tim Marsh, David Fry, Cameron Jackson, Eddie Burton, Nathaniel Tensar, John Walsh, Carl Gleason, Silas Blatchley Hadson, Martin Karsten, Michael Coonan, Bob Belcher, Chris Larkey, Stephen Lark, Nathan Campbell, Oliver Handlikin, Jake Dobbs, Joe Wolf, Comfy Hat, Ron Gervais, Balder Carlson, Nick Cole Hamilton, Dalton Seiler, Ken Young, Nobody, Andrew Steele, Brandon Boat, Niels Bachfrummer, D. Gallic, Anaxa Rhodes, Brad Wallace, Camel, Josh, Amir Aguilar, Dewey, David Gilbreth, Brian Pluckman, Connor Biblow, Chris Kaon, Spyro Sedaris, Pay, David Reed, Ryan Gunst, Sangustin, Morton Scanning, Josh Farkas, and Ashley Rain. Thank you all so much, and thanks again. Since I was a kid, I've loved the progression of racing games. I've loved the fantasy of taking an old beater and using it to climb to glory and assemble a garage of rare and beautiful machines. Of course, it almost never works out that way for anyone in real life. For the average person, owning a Maserati is as realistic a goal as actually uniting Middle-earth, and so we turn to games to give us an approximation of these fantasies. The only race most people actually run is the one against time, wear, and inevitable breakdown, and you never do place first in that one. Escapism and power fantasy are the dominant themes of game design because the medium is so uniquely suited to exploring your will. You can't ever say, well, this is how it should be, it is what it is, and then you have to adapt, or else wind up with a 4,000-pound paperweight. Jalopy is a game that embraces the triumphs and trials of owning a difficult, ancient junker car better than any I've ever seen, and I've hardly ever felt so strongly connected to a driving game because of it. By reflecting my reality, not my fantasy, Jalopy became a more personally compelling title than them. But the flip side of this is that games spend so much effort trying to portray the impossible, the exotic, and the empowering, that it's rarely that a player can find a meaningful reflection of the more mundane and regular concerns of their lives. Jalopy is a game that reflects the emotional and mechanical complexity of everyday things. It draws on the things we learn as adults about scarcity, family, and reliance on unreliable objects. It's a whole different side of the conversation about maturity in games than who's decapitating who and how much spandex. Jalopy was as vivid as it was to me because I've been an amateur mechanic all my adult life, but I've only been a competent amateur mechanic for the past couple of years. There's a patience you need that I didn't have for a long time, a willingness to go through each repair step in a very deliberate, very strict way to allow the machine to tell you what it needs as opposed to trying to bend it to you.